Hello, welcome to Guide London. My name's Nick Salmond. I'm a member of the Association of Professional Tourist Guides, and that's the people who run the Guide London website. The organisation consists of around 600 professional blue badge tourist guides for London. And at this time of year, we should be out and about in London showing our visitors the delights of this wonderful city. But because of the current situation, we're unable to do that because of government advice. We're confined to our houses. So we've been thinking of ways in which we can try and bring a little bit of London to you. If you can't come to London, we'll try and bring it into your living rooms. We're launching a series of broadcasts at 4 p.m. UK time on a Monday, a Wednesday and a Friday on our social media accounts. That's our Facebook account, YouTube and on Twitter. We'll hope to share with you some of the history of London, some of its culture, and tell you a little bit about some of the people who live here or who have lived here over the years. We'd love you to share these with your friends. We want as many of you to get excited about London and to come and see us when the current crisis is over. We're going to start off today by showing you exactly how you can enjoy London without ever having to leave the comfort of your armchair. I'm being joined by Pepe Martinez. Pepe is going to tell us about London in the movies, about how some of those iconic locations you've seen so many times in the films. Pepe will be explaining some of those. And then Vicky Bailey is going to tell us about London in book form, in print form, some of those books that you may have read that feature London so strongly. We are broadcasting live, so if you've got any questions or comments, then please do write them in the comments below the video where you're watching this, and hopefully we'll try and answer some of those questions at the end of the broadcast. But to start off with, I'm going to hand over to Pepe, who's going to tell us all about London on the big screen. Pepe.
Thank you very much, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Pepe Martinez, as Nick said, and I'm one of more than 600 Blue Badge guides in London, and I'm proud to be a member of Guide London. So I've been working as a Blue Badge guide in London for about 10 years, and one of the tours that I love to do more than any other are movie location tours. Now, what I'm going to do today is to try to get you enthusing about London using just 3 iconic London locations. Now, you might be thinking at first, hang on a second, I don't think I've ever seen a film set in London. Well, over the last 20 years, more and more film companies are filming here. So, as I said, I'm not going to be showing you any clips of those films, but I will show you the posters, and I hope that then you'll run off to download them or raid the DVD cupboard, and I hope that they will give you some ideas about planning your trip to London in the future. Now, the first of the 3 buildings that I'm going to talk about is one of the most iconic structures in the world. Now, we don't like to overuse that word iconic, but here it is. Now, do you know the name of this building? Now, don't worry, I'm going to give you the points if you call it Big Ben, but in fact, Big Ben is the name of the bell, the hour bell, first struck in 1859. So if a Hollywood director wants to tell an audience that they are in London, they will often use it both on the poster and in the film. Now, the earliest use of Big Ben that I've been able to find dates back to 1929 and a very early Alfred Hitchcock film. Alfred Hitchcock, the British film director, born in London. The interesting thing about this movie, Blackmail, was that they began filming it as a silent film. And halfway through production, they stopped production and they suddenly decided to convert it to a talkie, just straight out of the plot of the Singing in the Rain. But you do get a couple of shots of Big Ben. You also get this phenomenal chase sequence at the end across the roof of the British Library, which I hope you'll visit the British Museum when you come to London. Now, we're going to move forward in time to the 1950s. We've all got our own favourite Disney film. This is definitely one of mine, Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Never Grew Up. And there's a fantastic film, a scene of Peter flying through the air with the Darling children, landing on the minute hand of Big Ben before flying off to Netherland. Do you remember the directions? 3rd star to the left, straight on till morning. Now, Peter Pan was actually born as a stage play in 1904, and the writer J.M. Barrie very soon after gave away the stage rights to a very famous children's hospital called Great Ormond Street. And even though the copyright of Peter Pan has long run out, that Children's Hospital still gets the stage rights whenever Peter flies on any stage production in Britain. We're going to move forward now to a more recent film from 2006. So this is one of my favorite films. It's called V for Vendetta. And V for Vendetta is a dystopian political thriller. So if you look at the poster there, you've got the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben silhouetted in the background. Our lead character, V, with his back to us, is attempting to bring the fascist dictatorship running the British nation at this time to its knees. And so there is a plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament on the 5th of November. We're going to move forward to another movie now, a film from 2002, probably not the most appropriate film to talk about because of the coronavirus, but it is a phenomenal film and you get to see lots of London in it. So it's actually about a rage-inducing virus that gets released out into the general population by animal rights activists, but there are some great scenes of the lead character walking through the deserted streets of London. And again, if you look on the poster there, we've got Big Ben on the right-hand side. Now, where do I get a lot of my research material? Well, books, obviously, and this is one of my favorite books, the London Film Location Guide. And the cover of this book is a still from the movie that I just talked about, and that's the lead character, Cillian Murphy. Of course, another icon of London is the red double-decker bus. And so I do hope that if you visit London, your bus will be standing upright, unlike the one you see in the photograph. We're going to move forward again now. For the last 4 years, unfortunately, Big Ben has been covered in scaffolding. It was becoming the leaning tower of Big Ben. And so the next movie I'm going to talk about had a major plot scene at the end of the film set in front of Big Ben. So they had to go into the studio and recreate Big Ben using sets and digital effects. Now, this is one of my favorite films of the last couple of years, Mary Poppins Returns. Now, you might be thinking, oh, it's sacrilege, nothing can top the original. Well, I have to say, if you haven't seen Mary Poppins Returns, you should give it a little go. It's set 25 years in the future. Mary is played by the British actress Emily Blunt, and the lamplighter is played by an actor that you might know from a musical on Broadway. The musical is called Hamilton. That's Lin-Manuel Miranda. Now, in the opening song of this film, we get all three of these sites that I'll be talking about today featured within this first song, within the first 5 minutes. So Jack is a lamplighter. He's walking through the streets of London as the dawn is beginning to break, and he's putting out the gas lamps. And the opening song goes something a little bit like this. When the early morning hour has come and gone, through the misty morning showers I greet the dawn. For when the light has hit the ground, there's lots of treasures to be found underneath the lovely London sky. You'll be glad to know that's the only singing I'm going to be doing today. Now, there are lots and lots of other London locations, including Covent Garden, the Inns of Court that my colleague Vicky will be talking about later, and also featuring the next picture, Buckingham Palace. There is a great scene at the end with 100 lamplighters on their bikes cycling down the Mall around the golden statue that you see on their way to Big Ben. I'm going to move on now to the second of our locations, and perhaps this building or structure needs no introduction. One of the most famous bridges in the world. This is not London Bridge, this is Tower Bridge. And again, Tower Bridge is one of those locations that film directors can use in a movie, telling their audience exactly where they are. Now, I'll go through a series of films very quickly. The first is 2001, the sequel to The Mummy, The Mummy Returns. And there's a great scene at the end with all of the characters on a double-decker bus that's had the roof ripped off, and they're going over the bridge as the sun comes up. More recently, in 2015, we get Mission Impossible 5. Now, that's not Tom Cruise. That is one of the other lead actors. But the reason I wanted to show you this particular poster was because in the background, you can see the symbol of the London Underground, another icon of London. Now, towards the end of Mission Impossible 5, there is a great sequence in front of Tower Bridge outside the exit of the Tower of London, and it's definitely a film that is worth catching up with. A more recent film from last year, Spider-Man: Far From Home. There's the Tower Bridge in the background, and towards the end of the movie, there's a great fight sequence taking place in and around Tower Bridge. Does it get destroyed? Well, I'm glad to say that it survives. And there's also a sequence with the lead characters hiding in the jewel house at the Tower of London. Now, if you look at the next photograph, which was a publicity still the week before the movie was actually released, this is the three lead actors standing inside the Tower of London with Tower Bridge in the background. Now, you might know these three actors. The one on the right there, Tom Holland, who plays Spider-Man, with, I have to say, an impeccable American accent, is actually a London boy. He's from Cheam. So also, not Banksy, the great rapper. Stormzy is also from Cheam as well. Look him up. I've got just a couple of other movies to mention. We're going to move on to our next location now. This might be the third of the three locations that you know the least, but this is St. Paul's Cathedral. It's been there for more than 300 years, took only 35 years to build, and rises majestically on the London skyline. Now, a movie from last year that shot some scenes directly in front of St. Paul's Cathedral, Hobbs and Shaw. Now, if you've seen any of the Fast and Furious films, this was a spin-off. There's Jason Statham on the right, one of the lead characters. We've got The Rock on the left. And behind Jason Statham, you can actually see, again, Big Ben. So another director using Big Ben as a device to tell the audience in which city they are situated. In 2016, we had the film London Has Fallen. Now, this might not be at the top of your list. We can move on to the next slide, please, Nick. We have Gerard Butler, the Scottish actor, playing a CIA presidential bodyguard. And again, there's Big Ben featured in the poster. And we get this great shootout scene on the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, one of my favorite films that features St. Paul's was a film from 2009. Now, my colleague Vicky is going to be talking about Sherlock Holmes a little bit later on, but this is a movie version that you might have seen, and if you haven't, it's definitely worth checking out. So I was a bit dubious when I heard that Robert Downey Jr. was going to be playing this iconic British character, and I have to say, I think he pulled it off. The opening sequence of the film has him as Sherlock Holmes running across the front of St. Paul's Cathedral. We can move on to the next slide, please, Nick. Behind the columns that you see, he then jumps down onto the left-hand side of the picture. He knocks a man out in slow motion, runs down a circular staircase into the crypt, and there's a girl being sacrificed into the crypt. Well, when you come to London and visit this fantastic cathedral, the first thing you'll realize is, in fact, the circular staircase is not in the crypt at all. It's actually up on the main cathedral floor. So it might not surprise you that they do cheat in films. And remember, these are not documentaries, they are escapist entertainment. But just before we move on to the next slide, I want you to imagine a little old lady sitting on the steps right in front of you, feeding some pigeons, because in the 1960s iconic Disney film, Mary Poppins, this is where the Feed the Birds lady sits. Now, who doesn't love Mary Poppins? Now, you might be surprised to learn that, in fact, Mary Poppins wasn't filmed in London at all. It was almost entirely filmed on the back lot in Hollywood. Interesting. Now, I'll do one more quick film at St. Paul's, and then we'll finish off with what's coming up. So a film from last year, Mission Impossible 6 Fallout. Now, you might be surprised to learn that Tom Cruise films here a lot. I think his last 6 movies have all been filmed in London. Now, if you haven't seen this film, it has, in my opinion, one of the greatest chase sequences ever filmed in London. And I'm going to try and bring it alive for you. I want you to imagine that Tom Cruise has been chased into St. Paul's Cathedral. He then is chased up the staircase into the dome, the Whispering Gallery. He then jumps out onto the roof of the cathedral. He then jumps 100 feet across the road onto the roof of a building. He jumps another gap. He then runs across the roof of Blackfriars Station from left to right before he gets to the south bank of the river. He then runs along the bankside of the river before finishing in front of Tate Modern, the brick building in front of you. He runs into the building, he grabs hold of an elevator, and the elevator rises to the top of the tower before the baddie, played by Henry Cavill, flies off in a helicopter. So if you haven't seen that film, it truly is one of the great chase sequences in London. Now, just to finish off, I'm going to talk very briefly about some movies that feature London that are going to be coming out, if not this year, early next year. So we've got 3 posters here. The one on the left, this is the Enola Holmes mysteries. So this is a continuation of the Sherlock Holmes stories in literature. So Enola Holmes, the younger sister of Sherlock Holmes, played in the film version by Millie Bobby Brown. You might know her from Stranger Things. And Sherlock Holmes in this version is played by Henry Cavill, Superman. I was just talking about him in Mission Impossible. In the center, we've got Fast and Furious number 964. I joke, of course. And last summer, they spent the entire summer every weekend filming an incredible chase sequence up and down the River Thames. And then the one I'm most excited to see, delayed until November, is No Time to Die, the 25th James Bond film, and the last time that we're going to be seeing Daniel Craig as James Bond. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed listening to me today. You can follow me on Instagram at London Tour Guide Pepe, and I do a live show there every Sunday at 7 o'clock, talking about all things London. Thank you for tuning in. I look forward to helping you explore London in the future. And don't forget to go and visit guidelondon.org.uk and choose a guide to show you around this great city. I'm now going to hand you over to my lovely colleague, Vicky, who's going to talk about London and literature. Thank you, Vicky.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Hello. Well, my name is Vicky Bailey, and like Pepe, I'm one of the more than 600 Blue Badge tourist guides who are members of the Association of Professional Tourist Guides. And I would like to also welcome you from Guide London. Now, I've been guiding now for 15 years, and this is the first time that I've ever guided anything sitting in my living room. But given the current situation, it seems to be the only way to do it right now. Now, I'm very excited to be able to give you a bit of a talk about literature connected with central London, especially as we are, all of us at the moment, spending a lot more time indoors. And the first author that I'd like to tell you a bit about, not surprisingly, is the famous 19th century novelist Charles Dickens, who literally made 19th century London his own through all of the books that he wrote set around the London area at the time. Now, Charles Dickens has several ongoing themes, and one of his main themes that comes up again and again in his novels is the theme of law. Lawyers and the legal system in the 19th century. Because putting it mildly, Dickens was definitely not a fan of lawyers during that period. And his most famous book, where he is the most vitriolic about lawyers, is Bleak House. This book opens up with a thick fog all over London that's getting in everywhere, causing chaos and confusion. And this fog is Dickens' metaphor for the law, and his description of it, being Dickens, does last for a couple of pages. Any character in the book who makes a mistake of going to the law to help solve their problems will find themselves in a dreadful situation. As Dickens puts it, suffer any wrong that can be done you rather than set foot in this place. Now, Bleak House is set, a lot of it, around one of the 4 Inns of Court, which are London's legal district. And the particular Inn of Court that Bleak House is set around is Lincoln's Inn. And I tell you, if you've never been there, you have to go there for a visit, because the moment you walk in through the gateway in any of the grounds of the Inns of Court, you are literally going back in time, and you'll have left the 21st century well behind you. But I should warn you that if you read this novel, this is Dickens' longest book, depending on which edition you have, at over 900 pages. Now, the next book I'm going to say a few words about is a book very much to do with the poverty, the dreadful poverty that existed in the East End of London in the 19th century. This book is called The Worst Street in London by Fiona Rule, and It's all about the history of the notorious East End of London, especially notorious in the year 1888, when the famous serial killer Jack the Ripper committed a series of murders in that part of London. This because the social history of the area, showing how it became the poverty-ridden district that it did become at that period in history in the 19th century. And the worst street of the title is Dorset Street. And it was just off Dorset Street that Jack the Ripper murdered his fifth and possibly his last victim, Mary Jane Kelly. But that street was such a dreadful one that even though Mary Jane Kelly actually called for help, I tell you that even though 2 women heard her call for help, they ignored it because they said there were calls for help all the time around that particular street. The police never went along it on their own. They always went in 2s or 3s just to be on the safe side. And as for children, over 55% of children were dead by the age of 5 years old. And if you were lucky enough to have a roof over your head, to not be homeless, you'd be sharing usually one room with your entire family. So maybe 10 of you in just that one room together. So this was the East End of London at the time of the Ripper murders. A similar book connected to that same theme in many ways is a work of fiction by Anne Perry called Death in the Devil's Acre. The Devil's Acre was also a London slum very close to Westminster Abbey in the 19th century. And this particular book is about a series of murders that take place there. But as with Anne Perry, one of the themes again that comes up in her books is the theme of the poverty at the time, the grim reality of prostitution, the living conditions, and the absolute lack of any hope that people living around that part of London would have for the rest of their lives. And yet the Devil's Acre, being so close to Westminster Abbey, is not much more, probably much less than half a mile from Buckingham Palace. So this is the very rich and the very poor living side by side in central London. But going on to something a bit lighter, I don't think, again, as with Charles Dickens, that you could ever do any talk on literary London without including Sherlock Holmes, which Pepe also mentioned in his talk. Now, Sherlock Holmes's address, his fictional address in central London, number 221B Baker Street, probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous addresses in central London. And people still actually write letters to Sherlock Holmes at 221B Baker Street, often just for a bit of fun. Those letters get taken to the Sherlock Holmes Museum, which has adopted the address 221B Baker Street, and they respond that sadly Sherlock Holmes has retired and is now raising bees out in the countryside. But probably again, the most famous Sherlock Holmes book is The Hound of the Baskervilles, this deadly hound who has his base down on Dartmoor in southwest England and who hunts members of the Baskerville family down there. Now, if you're ever in Trafalgar Square and you go along Northumberland Avenue, just off the square, there is a pub down there called the Sherlock Holmes Pub. And the reason that the building that the pub is in is called the Sherlock Holmes Pub is because there used to be a hotel on that site. And it was that hotel that the fictional character of Sir Henry Baskerville stayed in The Hound of the Baskervilles. Another collection of Sherlock Holmes books by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle that I like to talk about are The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes are Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's first collection of short stories about Sherlock Holmes. They're very fun and light-hearted. And I think one of my favourite ones in that collection is a story where actually Sherlock Holmes gets beaten by his adversary. This is not something that happens very often in the Sherlock Holmes books, so it's worth reading just to see a bit of that. The last book that I'm going to say a bit about is a book by Virginia Woolf called Mrs. Dalloway. Now, for Virginia Woolf, London was a lifeline from the depression that she suffered from all her life. She had lived outside London for 10 years with her husband, but when they came back to central London and lived there, she was so delighted that she wrote Mrs. Dalloway as a homage to London. And at the very beginning of the book, the titular character of the book, Clarissa Dalloway, goes on a walk through London. She starts out in a house down in Westminster. She walks through St James's Park and up through Green Park and finds herself on the main road, Piccadilly there. And she feels liberated, as though she's escaped from her gilded cage because of all the hustle and bustle around her everywhere. Similarly, later on in the book, Mrs. Dalloway's daughter Elizabeth takes an omnibus to the Strand, not far from St Paul's Cathedral. And when she gets off and is walking around that area, which is on the edge of London's business district, right near the Inns of Court, she feels inspired enough by, again, the atmosphere around her to think that she can do anything she wants and become anything that she wants to become, from a doctor to a farmer to a member of Parliament. So that, again, is very much Virginia Woolf's experience in a way, because Virginia Woolf, suffering from depression her whole life, coming out onto the streets of London and walking around and looking at people was a form of therapy for her almost. She once wrote that to escape is the greatest of pleasures, street haunting in winter, the greatest of adventures. She'd go out on the street, she'd walk around, and she'd write up a book of street hauntings about people and imagine what they were doing. So as I said, for her, London was very much a lifeline. Now, again, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. And again, we look forward to continue helping you explore London from our living rooms in the future. If you want to hear more, my website is www.londontourguidevicky.com, and the website for all of us guides, guidelondon.org.uk. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Vicky. Pepe is still with us as well. So we've had a few comments, Pepe. Apart from more requests for your singing, we've had a message from Oliver Briggs, who says Paddington 2 is surely the greatest movie set in London. What's your thinking about that?
Oliver, I would totally agree with you. Unfortunately, I was only given 15 minutes, so I really had to choose films that I think that would appeal to a kind of a wide cross section. But the chase sequence and the treasure hunt element of Paddington 2 makes it one of the best films ever. Thank you for your question.
And Vicky, what would you say is your favourite book about London? If someone really wants to get to know London, what book should they choose?
Honestly, that's so difficult to say because London changes so much as each, you might say, century goes by. But again, because of the limited time, I couldn't include everything. But the author C.J. Sansom has written a brilliant series of books set mainly in London in the 16th century about Shardlake, Matthew Shardlake, who's a lawyer. And those books get over very well, not just the living in London at the time, but the paranoia and the fear caused by Henry VIII wielding his axe a bit too enthusiastically, and also the changing the introduction of the Protestant religion into a Catholic country at the time. Another of the books, which I've already spoken a bit about, is the Anne Perry book, Death in the Devil's Acre, which for me very much sums up just what it was like to be poor in London in the 19th century. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Vicky. Thank you so much, Pepe. If you want to know more about the London Guides, then the best place to go is our Guide London website, guidelondon.org.uk. There you can search for all the Blue Badge tourist guides. You can put in a search, you can find them by name, or you can go down and you can just pick one you like the look of. You really come in all different shapes and sizes. And you can also look at some of the tours that we offer as well. So hopefully you will come and visit us in London once the current crisis is over. Now, we're going to be back on Wednesday at around the same time, 4 in the afternoon UK time. That's about 11 a.m. in the morning New York time. And on Wednesday, we'll be looking at history, and in particular, how London's coped with previous centuries when events like this has happened. And in particular, we'll be looking at the Great Fire of London and of the bombing of the city during the Second World War, and how London has coped with the events. So please share this with your friends. If you want to see it again, go to our YouTube channel and the video will be there. But from Vicky and from Pepe and from me, for the moment, very goodbye to you all.
Bye, guys.
Bye.